Welcome to Veil Marks, where every story uncovers the marks left by loyalty, courage, and love. Today's story is not just about a boy and his dog. It is about the silent heroes among us and the timeless bond that defies doubt and time itself. As Winston Churchill once said, "Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it guarantees all others." This video holds a lesson that will touch your soul and perhaps remind you of your own silent heroes. Stay with us until the very end. You won't want to miss the truth that will unfold. If our story resonates with you, please comment, subscribe, and help Veil Marks reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support fuels the creation of even deeper, more meaningful stories. Most 11-year-olds might stumble over their words when asked to talk about a hero. Not Caleb Carter. At least, not until today. He sat in the middle row of classroom 3B at Liberty Oaks Elementary, fingers curled around a worn photograph he had carried in his backpack every day since the school year began. Caleb had only been at Liberty Oaks for a month, and in that time, he had become very skilled at staying invisible. He kept his head down, did his work quietly, and never raised his hand. The fewer people who noticed him, the fewer who would whisper or stare. But today was different. "All right, class," said Ms. Rowe, standing in front of the whiteboard where the words "Show and Tell, Heroes" had been written in green marker. "One by one, you'll come up and share who you admire most and why. Remember, it can be someone you know, or even someone famous." A few hands shot up. A girl named Madison talked about her aunt, a nurse who had once volunteered during a hurricane. A boy named Trevor held up a signed baseball and said his hero was a major league pitcher. The room filled with cheerful applause and excited chatter. Then Ms. Rowe's eyes landed on Caleb. "You're up, Caleb," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Caleb swallowed hard. His legs felt like rubber as he stood and made his way to the front of the class. The photograph in his hand was bent at the corners, the colors faded by time. It showed a large, broad-shouldered pit bull with a scar along his side, ears alert beneath a battered tactical vest. Beside the dog knelt a man in uniform, Caleb's father. Caleb held up the picture for everyone to see. His voice shook at first but grew steadier with each word. "My hero is Diesel," he began. "He's my dog. He served in the military and saved my dad's life." For one heartbeat, there was silence. Then, like a wave crashing on the shore, laughter rolled through the room. Some kids giggled, others outright burst into loud, unkind guffaws. Someone in the back called out, "Did he fetch grenades or just guard the snack bowls?" Another boy joked, "Maybe he chased off the enemy with his barking." Even the quieter students tittered nervously, unsure if they should laugh or not. Most did. Ms. Rowe didn't stop them. In fact, she chuckled softly herself. "A dog, Caleb?" she asked, her tone dancing between amused and condescending. "Your hero is a dog? Did he wear a cape and carry a badge shaped like a bone?" The class erupted again. Caleb's knuckles turned white as he gripped the photo tighter. He didn't answer. His father, Staff Sergeant Mason Carter, had once told him, "The world laughs at what it doesn't understand." But the truth always waits its turn. His grandfather, Franklin Carter, had said it another way. Sometimes, the truth has to walk into the room before anyone believes it. Caleb thought about sitting down, about swallowing his words like he always did. But the photo felt heavy in his hands, not because of the paper, but because of the story it carried. "I'm telling the truth," Caleb said quietly, though few heard him over the noise. The laughter continued. It was loud and cruel, and it stung worse than any bruise Caleb had ever gotten. But before he could retreat back to his seat, a sound interrupted the ruckus. A sharp metallic click, followed by the steady rhythm of pause. The classroom door swung open. For a moment, the whole world seemed to tilt into silence. Standing in the doorway was Franklin Carter, tall and sturdy despite his years, his face lined with both age and wisdom. But it wasn't his presence that stole the breath from the room. Beside him stood Diesel. The pit bull was massive, his tan and grey coat crisscrossed with old scars. He wore a black tactical vest, its once shiny insignia dulled and weathered by time and sand and service. His eyes, deep, intelligent, unwavering, scanned the classroom calmly, as if he had assessed far graver situations than a room full of schoolchildren. A hush fell like a blanket over the room. The laughter evaporated into the air as quickly as it had started. Miss... Ro opened her mouth, but no words came out. Diesel walked forward with slow, deliberate steps. Caleb's breath caught as the dog stopped directly beside him and sat, his head held high, his posture alert but gentle. Without waiting for a command, Diesel raised one paw and held it aloft in a silent salute. Gasps rippled through the room. One student dropped his pencil. Another covered her mouth. Franklin spoke in a voice that was steady and calm, carrying the weight of someone who had nothing to prove but much to share. This is Diesel. He served overseas with my son, Caleb's father. He completed over 25 missions. He saved lives, including Mason's. And when Mason didn't come home, Diesel did. Ms. Rowe blinked, color draining from her face. No one laughed now. Diesel lowered his paw and rested it gently against Caleb's leg, as if to say, "You are not alone." Caleb straightened his shoulders. For the first time since arriving at Liberty Oaks, he wasn't the invisible kid anymore. But more importantly, he wasn't alone in telling the truth. Sometimes, the truth didn't need words. Sometimes, it simply walked into the room. And now, it had. The air in the classroom was heavy. Diesel's silent salute had frozen every whisper, every breath. Ms. Rowe stood motionless, her usual cheerful authority replaced by something that looked a lot like doubt. The laughter had died, but the echo of it still lingered in Caleb's ears. Franklin Carter stepped forward, the lines on his face deepening not with age alone, but with the weight of memory. He reached into the worn leather satchel slung across his shoulder and withdrew a folder. Its edges were frayed, the clasp barely holding. "I thought this day might come," he said quietly. He opened the folder and produced a laminated certificate, yellowed at the corners but still clear. At the top, bold letters declared, "Certificate of Valor, United States Army K-9 Unit Diesel, service number K941273. Franklin held it high enough for the class to see. Ms. Rowe took an involuntary step closer, adjusting her glasses. "This document verifies Diesel's active duty," Franklin explained. He served in the Middle East for more than 5 years, participated in over 25 missions. His primary role, detection of improvised explosive devices and search and rescue under hostile fire. The certificate listed locations Caleb had only heard whispered about in news reports. Kandahar, Ramadi, Mosul, places where soldiers had walked into danger, where not all had walked out. He wasn't just sniffing out snacks, Franklin added gently. Diesel was the partner of Staff Sergeant Mason Carter, Caleb's father. A ripple of movement passed through the students. Even the kids who had joined the laughter now sat rigid, their earlier amusement replaced by something else, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. Franklin continued. During an ambush that disabled Sergeant Carter's squad, Diesel detected a secondary explosive device hidden near the extraction route. His alert saved the lives of 6 men and women. Mrs. Rowe pressed a hand to her chest, her face pale. Caleb's throat tightened. He remembered the story, though he had never heard it told out loud at school before. He had only known it in quiet kitchen table conversations with his grandfather, where the weight of loss had always kept the volume low. Franklin's voice grew softer. When Mason fell, Diesel didn't abandon him. Despite being wounded himself, shrapnel to the hind leg and a burn scar that still marks his side, Diesel stayed. It took 2 soldiers to pull him back to the evacuation point. Diesel sat calmly beside Caleb, his ears twitching slightly at the sound of his own name, but his eyes remained steady, unmoving. "And," Franklin said, his voice catching only slightly, "when we buried Mason, Diesel stood beside the casket. When the honor guard saluted, Diesel raised his paw. That's not a trick. That's a gesture he was trained to offer only to commanding officers or in ceremonies of final respect." Caleb closed his eyes. He could still see the memory so clearly. The crisp flag, the firing salute, the rows of soldiers standing in silent tribute, and Diesel lifting his paw at just the right moment, honoring the man he had followed into fire and back. The classroom was so quiet now that Caleb could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. But into that fragile quiet, another voice pushed forward, Tyler Green. He was one of the older students, a tall boy with sharp eyes and a reputation for challenging everything. He stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. "That's a nice story," Tyler said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But stories don't prove much these days." Ms. Rowe frowned but didn't interrupt. Tyler continued, his voice edged with skepticism. "Anyone can print up a certificate, and videos. Well, people fake those all the time. My cousin's into digital effects. He says you can make anything look real." A few students exchanged uneasy glances. Even though many had softened toward Caleb in the last few minutes, doubt was a contagious thing. Once it was spoken aloud, it could spread faster than truth. Caleb felt the old, familiar tightening in his chest. That sensation of standing at the edge of a high place with everyone watching, waiting for him to fall. He looked down at Diesel. The pit bull didn't move. His calmness wasn't indifference. It was the patience of someone, or something, that had weathered worse than schoolyard doubt. "I'm not lying," Caleb said quietly. "My dad died. Diesel came back." "That's not a story. That's my life." Tyler shrugged, unbothered. "I'm just saying, people make things up to get attention. Especially when they feel invisible." Ms. Rowe finally raised a hand. "That's enough, Tyler." But the damage had been done. Caleb felt the weight of the room's eyes on him, not the mocking laughter of before, but something almost worse. Pity mixed with suspicion, like they wanted to believe him, but weren't sure they should. Franklin didn't speak this time. He just stood behind Caleb, a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, a silent anchor. Caleb's mind spun. He thought of the certificate, of Diesel's scars, of the way the dog had sat beside his father's grave as if keeping watch. But he also thought of something else, something he had never told anyone outside his family. "There's a video," Caleb said softly. The class leaned forward. "My dad's team recorded it. The mission..." "It's not just a story or a certificate. It's real. And if you want to see it, I can show you." His voice trembled slightly, but he forced himself to meet Tyler's gaze. Diesel exhaled a deep breath and rested his scarred head against Caleb's leg. Sometimes, truth didn't shout. It didn't argue or fight back. Sometimes it waited, quietly, until it was ready to be seen. The following morning, Caleb found himself walking the quiet corridor leading to the school's counseling office. Diesel padded silently beside him, his claws tapping softly against the linoleum floor. Franklin had insisted on accompanying them, but Mrs. Daniels had gently asked if Caleb could come alone. "She needs to speak with you privately," Franklin had whispered, placing a steady hand on Caleb's shoulder. "But whatever it is, you're not alone. Now, Mrs. Daniels opened the door to her office and waved him in. She was not like Ms. Rowe. Where Ms. Rowe's authority came from rules and sharp words, Mrs. Daniels carried a softer weight, the kind that comes from having listened to far too many secrets. Diesel settled by the couch, laying his head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. Mrs. Daniels closed the door and knelt down to Caleb's level, her silver pendant catching the morning light. "Caleb," she began, "your grandfather shared some files with me this morning. Files he's kept, well, longer than he should have." She motioned toward a manila folder sitting on the desk, its edges curled and worn. "He thought you were still too young to carry this weight." "But after yesterday, he believes you're ready." Caleb's stomach tightened, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. "What weight, Mrs.?" Daniels took a slow breath. "Your father's last mission. It wasn't what everyone said it was." She pulled out the folder and carefully laid out several sheets of paper. Most were heavily redacted, thick black lines crossing out details, but the headers were intact. United States Army, Operation Safe Harbor. "Your dad's official report listed it as a routine patrol, Mrs." Daniels explained. That was a lie. His team had been ordered into a covert hostage rescue. A terrorist faction had taken civilians in a small village near the base. Intelligence had confirmed their location. Caleb's throat felt dry. Why lie about that? "Because things went wrong," she said softly. "Very wrong. Leadership higher up authorized the mission without proper support or extraction plans. When the team moved in, they encountered far heavier resistance than expected. The objective became not just to free the hostages, but to get everyone out alive." She flipped to a photograph clipped to one of the pages. Blurry, dust everywhere. But there was no mistaking the figures. His father, in full combat gear, rifle raised, and beside him, Diesel, his pit bull frame tense, ears forward, eyes fixed on something outside the frame. Caleb reached out and traced Diesel's image with one trembling finger. Mrs. Daniels leaned closer. "Your father's team freed the hostages, but the escape path was compromised. That's when Diesel did something extraordinary." She held up another document, handwritten. "A field report. K9 unit identified structural weakness in east wall. Dog-initiated rescue protocol, dragging Sergeant Erica Miles from imminent collapse zone. Secondary device triggered. Casualties avoided due to K9's intervention." Caleb's eyes widened. He had never heard that name before. "Sergeant Miles? She was the youngest member of your dad's team." "New to deployment. Diesel didn't just save your father that day, Caleb. He saved her too. Pulled her from a building moments before it detonated." Mrs. Daniels' voice dropped lower. "Your father stayed behind. He covered the exit for the hostages. That's why he didn't make it out." Caleb's vision blurred as the weight of those words settled over him. He had always imagined his dad as a soldier, brave, dutiful, but the truth painted him as something even greater. A protector, a man who had chosen others over himself. "But why didn't anyone ever tell me?" Caleb whispered. "Why let everyone think it was just a patrol?" Mrs. Daniels sighed. "Because admitting the truth would have meant exposing command failures. Men with stars on their shoulders might have faced charges. Careers would have ended, so the report was buried. And Franklin, well, he kept the documents safe, but he didn't want you carrying the burden until you were ready." She reached across the desk, placing her hand gently over Caleb's. "Your grandfather told me something else. He believes Diesel has been waiting too, waiting for the day you were old enough to understand not just the story, but the responsibility of telling it." Caleb looked down at Diesel. The old pit bull lifted his head, eyes meeting Caleb's with a steady, patient gaze. The scars along Diesel's flank stood out against his graying fur. Silent proof of what he had endured. Silent testimony to what he had saved. A lump formed in Caleb's throat. He always knew. "Even when nobody believed me." Mrs. Daniels nodded. "And now it's time the world knows too." Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not the sharp, defensive pride he had felt yesterday when the class laughed. This was deeper. He wasn't just defending a story anymore. He was defending the memory of courage, the truth of sacrifice, the kind of legacy that too many had tried to hide. Mrs. Daniels gathered the documents and slid them back into the folder. Franklin wants you to decide what happens next. Whether we take this further, whether we tell the full story. Caleb didn't hesitate. We have to, he said. Not just for Dad, for Diesel, and for Sergeant Miles. People should know. As he rose from the chair, Diesel stood, pressing his broad, scarred head gently against Caleb's hand. For the first time, Caleb didn't feel like a boy defending a fantasy. He felt like a guardian of the truth. And he knew the fight had only just begun. It did not take long for the story of Diesel and Caleb to spread beyond the walls of Liberty Oaks Elementary. By the end of the week, local newspapers ran the headline, "The Soldier's Dog Who Never Stopped Serving." Photos of Diesel, scarred but proud, circulated online, along with Caleb's brave speech. What had begun as a boy defending the truth became something much larger. But with recognition came a new calling. It was Mrs. Daniels who first suggested the idea. "Caleb," she said gently one afternoon, "I have friends who work with veterans suffering from PTSD. Some of them could really use a visit from a hero who understands sacrifice." Caleb looked down at Diesel, who lay by his feet, his breathing slow but steady. The old pit bull lifted his head, as if he already understood what was being asked. Franklin agreed. "Your dad always said Diesel wasn't just a soldier. He was a healer, too." So, on a crisp Saturday morning, Caleb and Franklin guided Diesel into the Liberty Veterans' Home. The building was quiet, sitting beneath towering oak trees that had stood longer than any of its residents. As they entered, Caleb felt a sudden wave of nerves. The veterans inside weren't like the students at school. They carried silent burdens he couldn't fully understand. But Diesel padded forward confidently, his head held high. The old tactical vest brushed clean for the occasion. The first few visits were simple. Diesel would sit quietly while Caleb shared stories about his father and the missions they had learned about from Mrs. Daniels' files. At first, some veterans remained distant, arms crossed, eyes shadowed with years of things unsaid. But Diesel had patience that humans often lacked. He would simply wait. His presence alone seemed to calm the room. The way he leaned gently against a wheelchair, or rested his head on an old boot, reminded them he was not just a symbol. He was a comrade who understood. Then came the day they met Mr. Alton Reyes. Mr. Reyes was a large man, though age had shrunk his frame. His room was tucked in the far corner of the facility, sparse except for a faded flag above his bed and a photo of younger soldiers in the desert heat. He rarely spoke, the staff whispered. He refused visitors. But when Caleb and Diesel paused outside his door, Franklin's eyes softened. "I knew him once," Franklin murmured. "He served in the same battalion as your father, though he left the service early." The nurse warned. He may not respond. But as Diesel entered the room, something shifted. Mr. Reyes opened his eyes, their sharpness dulled, but not gone. His gaze fell first on Caleb, then on Franklin. But it wasn't until he saw Diesel that he truly focused. Diesel approached slowly, as if sensing the fragility of the moment. He stopped 2 feet from the bed, ears alert, tail low but wagging gently. Without any cue, Diesel lifted his paw and held it aloft, a soldier's salute. The room seemed to freeze. Caleb watched Mr. Reyes blink rapidly, emotion flickering across his weathered face. His lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then, hoarse and barely above a whisper, he said, "Mason's dog." Caleb stepped forward. "You knew my dad, Mr. Reyes nodded stiffly. "Mason Carter, He saved my life once. Always talked about his son. Said he hoped you'd grow up braver than him. Caleb's chest tightened. He said that? Every chance he got. Diesel, still holding his paw up, finally lowered it and gently pressed his head against Mr. Reyes's knee. The old soldier's hand, tremoring from years of age and war, found its way into Diesel's fur. The nurse at the door wiped her eyes quietly. That day stretched longer than planned. Mr. Reyes spoke more than he had in years. He told Caleb about training missions, about Mason's stubborn courage, and even about a younger Diesel's antics in the barracks. Stories no official report had ever recorded. And as Diesel lay beside Mr. Reyes, something in the veteran's face softened. The haunted look, the weight of years spent believing he was forgotten, began to lift. He's not just your dog, Mr. Reyes whispered to Caleb as the sun set beyond the window. His loyalty doesn't end with Mason. Diesel belongs to all of us who were left behind. All of us who were never thanked. Caleb understood then, fully and painfully, that Diesel's mission had never been only about protecting him. Diesel carried the unspoken promises of his father's generation. He was a living bridge between the past and the present, between those who fought and those still healing. By the time they left, word had spread through the home. Other veterans, once silent, once resistant, now waited by their doors, hoping for a visit from the dog who never stopped serving. And Diesel, despite his age, answered the call. The visits to the veteran's home became a routine. Diesel, despite his age, continued his mission with quiet determination. Caleb, walking proudly by his side, found strength not only in sharing his father's story, but in watching Diesel heal the invisible wounds others carried. The bond between boy and dog deepened into something that words could no longer fully explain. But neither Caleb nor Franklin could predict the man who would soon walk into their lives, carrying a piece of the truth they had long sought. It was late on a Wednesday afternoon when the knock came at Franklin's front door. Caleb was in the living room brushing Diesel's graying fur, speaking softly to the old pit bull about the veterans they had met that week. Diesel's eyes were closed, his breathing slow, but his ears flicked at the sound of the knock. Franklin opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man standing on the porch. His face bore the sharp angles of someone once forged by military discipline, though time had softened them. A faded army jacket stretched across his chest, and in his left hand, he held a worn leather folder. "Mr. Franklin Carter?" the man asked. Franklin nodded, narrowing his eyes. "That's me." The man extended his hand. "Name's Logan Reese. I served with Mason, your son." Franklin froze. Caleb looked up sharply from the couch. Even Diesel opened his eyes, head lifting as though sensing the importance of this stranger. Logan's voice softened. "May I come in? I have something both of you need to see." They gathered in the living room. Diesel shifted to sit beside Caleb, resting his head against the boy's leg. Logan sat forward in the chair across from them, the folder in his lap. "I've followed your story," Logan began. "The newspaper articles, the school assembly. I didn't know Mason's son was looking for the truth. If I had known sooner, I would have come earlier." Caleb felt his heart pounding. "You knew my dad?" Logan nodded gravely. "He wasn't just a fellow soldier. He was the backbone of our unit. Always did what was right, even when it was hard, even when it cost him." He placed the leather folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were documents yellowed by time and lined with military codes and stamps. But what caught Caleb's eye first were the photographs, images of soldiers in desert fatigues, the sand whipping around them, and always, somewhere in the frame, Diesel. Logan pointed to one photo. "This was taken 2 weeks before the mission. Diesel saved us more times than I can count." but it's what happened on Mason's final mission that brings me here today." Franklin leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. Caleb felt Diesel shift his weight, pressing closer to him. Logan drew out a set of official-looking papers, each bearing military seals and signatures. "The story told to the public was that your father's death resulted from a breach of protocol. They said he disobeyed direct orders during a patrol, putting the team in danger." Caleb swallowed hard. He had heard this version many times, the version that always seemed incomplete. But that wasn't the truth, Logan continued, voice firm now. "The patrol was not routine. We were sent into an area marked as clear, but Mason and Diesel detected signs it was a setup. He tried to halt the advance. Command overruled him." Caleb felt the air grow colder. "There was an ambush," Logan said, eyes darkening with the memory. "If Mason hadn't acted, we would have all been killed. Diesel found 2 IEDs and warned us just in time. Your father got most of us out, but he stayed back to cover the retreat. He and Diesel held the line." Logan's hands trembled as he unfolded another document. "I kept a copy of the original after-action report, the real one, not the sanitized version." Caleb leaned in, his breath catching. The paper detailed the engagement, the warnings Mason had given, the decision to disobey a direct but dangerous order, and the heroic actions that saved 9 soldiers. Diesel's name was mentioned repeatedly, credited for life-saving alerts. But Command didn't want to admit the mission was mishandled, Logan said bitterly. Acknowledging Mason's actions meant admitting their mistake, so they altered the report, said he violated procedure. That false narrative has stained his name for years. Caleb sat in stunned silence. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of the revelation. Franklin closed his eyes briefly, jaw clenched, as though battling the anger swelling within him. Logan leaned toward Caleb. "Your father was a hero. And Diesel? He wasn't just your protector. He's been carrying this truth in his loyalty, in his scars, in every step he's taken beside you." Diesel looked up then, as if understanding the moment. He raised his paw and placed it gently on Caleb's knee, the same salute he had given so many times before. Caleb's throat tightened. "All these years, he's been trying to lead me to this." Logan nodded. "That's why Diesel insisted on those veterans' visits. That's why he watched over you so fiercely. He was waiting for you to be ready to carry the truth." Franklin's voice broke the silence. "So what do we do now?" Logan exhaled. "The Veterans Tribunal can reopen the case. With this evidence and eyewitness accounts, including mine, the truth can finally be made official. Mason's honor restored." Caleb met Logan's steady gaze, then looked down at Diesel. The old pit bull's eyes, cloudy with age but bright with purpose, held his. "No more secrets," Caleb whispered. "No more shadows." For the first time in years, Diesel wagged his tail. Not out of habit, but with the quiet relief of a mission almost complete. The morning of the ceremony arrived with the sky washed in gentle gold, the kind of dawn that felt like the world was holding its breath. The campus of Liberty Oaks Elementary had never looked so solemn or so proud. Rows of folding chairs lined the gymnasium floor. American flags draped the walls, joined by banners honoring veterans and service dogs. In the center of the stage stood a podium, polished until it gleamed. Behind it, a large screen displayed a simple, moving message. Honoring Diesel and Sergeant Mason Carter, guardians across generations. Reporters from local newspapers and television stations gathered along the back row. Veterans in uniform, some with medals glinting against their jackets, filled the seats. Families of soldiers, mothers, fathers, widows, and children sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces reflecting anticipation, pride, and something deeper, a readiness to witness long overdue recognition. Caleb adjusted the tie around his neck. fingers trembling slightly. He wore his father's old service pin clipped to his shirt pocket. Diesel sat at his side, wearing his retired K9 vest, the patches faded but dignified. His once powerful frame now moved stiffly, and his grey muzzle told a story of years and wisdom that words never could. Beside them stood Grandpa Franklin, his shoulders squared, his eyes shining with both pride and the heaviness of what was to come. "Are you ready, Caleb?" he asked softly. Caleb nodded, though his voice caught when he spoke. "I think Diesel's been ready longer than any of us." The principal, Mrs. N. Reyes stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear but warm. "Today, we gather not just to honor bravery in the field, but the courage to carry truth forward, even when others refuse to see it." She paused, looking toward Caleb and Diesel. "That courage belongs to Caleb Carter and his loyal guardian, Diesel." A gentle ripple of applause moved through the crowd. Mrs. Reyes continued. "When Caleb first spoke of Diesel's heroism, many laughed. But truth is persistent. And thanks to the determination of a young boy, the sacrifice of a brave father, and the loyalty of an extraordinary dog, we now understand the depth of what was once unseen." She gestured toward Caleb. "Caleb, the stage is yours." Caleb stood, his knees briefly weak, but Diesel nudged his leg gently, as if to remind him of the countless times they had already faced doubt and overcome it. They walked to the podium together, Diesel's claws tapping softly against the wooden stage. Caleb looked out over the sea of faces. His classmates, once skeptical, now watched with admiration. Veterans sat upright, solemn. Journalists poised their pens, but seemed to sense this was a moment for listening, not just recording. Caleb cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began. "I'm not here today as someone special. I'm just a son. A son who wanted the world to remember his father, not as a mistake, but as a hero." He paused, the weight of his next words heavy in his chest. "But this story isn't just about my dad. It's about Diesel." He rested a hand on Diesel's back, feeling the steady, slow rise and fall of his breath. "Diesel wasn't just my dad's partner. He wasn't just a service dog. Diesel has been a keeper of memories. A protector of stories that others tried to bury." Caleb scanned the room, locking eyes with a few veterans who nodded silently in agreement. "When my dad stayed behind to protect his team, Diesel stayed too. And when my dad didn't come home, Diesel did. He came home not just to protect me, but to carry my father's story until I was strong enough to share it." A murmur of emotion spread through the audience. Mothers clutched their children's hands. A young soldier, in the third row, wiped his eyes discreetly. "And Diesel didn't stop there," Caleb continued. "He helped heal others. Veterans who thought the world had forgotten them. Soldiers who carried wounds no doctor could see. Diesel gave them hope. He gave them something else to fight for." Caleb paused, swallowing hard. And now, even though he's older, even though his steps are slower, Diesel's mission isn't over. At that moment, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, Diesel struggled to his feet. Caleb instinctively reached to help him, but Diesel moved with the quiet determination that had defined him all his life. He walked slowly, carefully to the front of the stage. Then Diesel lifted his right paw and held it out in a salute. The room held its breath. Every child, every adult, every hardened soldier, all fell into reverent silence. For a heartbeat, it felt as if time paused. Then, from the middle of the veterans section, an elderly man rose unsteadily to his feet. His cane tapped softly against the gymnasium floor as he stood tall. "I know that salute," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know that dog." The room turned toward him. "My name is Sergeant First Class Everett Hayes. Years ago in that ambush overseas, Diesel didn't just save Sergeant Carter and the squad. He saved me. If it weren't for that dog and Mason's sacrifice, I wouldn't be standing here today." A stunned hush filled the air. "I am a part of this story," Hayes continued. "And now, thanks to Caleb and Diesel, the whole world finally knows it." For a moment, the only sounds were the soft creaks of the chairs as people leaned forward, drawn by the raw honesty of the moment. Then, as if a single shared breath was released, the room erupted into applause. Not the loud, celebratory kind, but a deep, resounding wave of gratitude and recognition. Tears shone in the eyes of soldiers and civilians alike. Diesel remained poised in his salute, the old warrior offering one final gesture of loyalty, not just to Mason or to Caleb, but to every life he had touched and protected. Caleb crouched beside Diesel, wrapping his arms gently around the dog's broad shoulders. "It's okay," he whispered. "You've done more than enough." The applause swelled again. Some students held handmade signs that read, "Diesel, our hero." Others simply stood, hands over their hearts, Mrs. Reyes returned to the microphone, her own eyes shining. "Today, Liberty Oaks Elementary honors not just bravery, but the enduring power of truth, love, and loyalty. Diesel and Mason Carter's legacy will be remembered here and beyond." She nodded toward the back of the room, where a new plaque had been mounted on the gymnasium wall. It read, "In honor of Diesel and Sergeant Mason Carter, for valor, loyalty, and the stories that endure." Caleb looked at the plaque, then at Diesel. The old pit bull met his eyes, and for a brief, beautiful second, it was as if Mason himself was there, standing beside them. No more doubts, no more laughter dismissing their truth. Just legacy and love. The morning was quiet, touched by the soft gold of early sunlight filtering through the leaves of the old oak tree. It was the same oak where Caleb had once played with his father, where Diesel had stood guard, always watchful. Now, the old pit bull lay peacefully beneath its wide branches, his breath shallow but calm. Caleb sat beside him, one hand resting gently on Diesel's worn shoulder. "You never let go," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." Diesel's eyes flickered open at the sound of Caleb's voice. Even in his final moments, there was strength in them, an unspoken trust that Caleb would carry the weight of the memories they shared. The boy who had once stood alone in a classroom of doubt had grown into someone ready to bear the mantle of protector and storyteller. As the sun rose higher, Diesel took one last breath, and then his chest stilled. For a long while, Caleb remained sitting, feeling the gentle breeze sway the branches above him. The silence was not empty. It was full of all the years, all the missions, all the moments Diesel had guarded his family, his friends, and the truth. When Grandpa Franklin found Caleb still sitting there, he didn't speak. He only placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder and nodded toward a small plaque they had prepared for this day. Together, they knelt and set it into the earth at the base of the tree. The engraving read, "Diesel, the hero who never left his post." News of Diesel's passing spread quickly. The local papers published a tribute. Veterans who had once been silent about their stories now came forward, speaking of how Diesel had saved them, not just from danger, but from the quiet battles of isolation and memory. Teachers who had once dismissed Caleb's words now shared his story in classrooms. Even the children who had once laughed now wore small pins shaped like a paw print, a silent apology and a proud badge of belief. But Caleb knew mourning was not enough. He had promised Diesel that he would not let their story end here. That fall, with the support of Grandpa Franklin, Mrs. Daniels and Sergeant Hayes, Caleb launched a new program, Diesel's Promise. It was more than a memorial. It was a mission. Diesel's Promise offered workshops for kids and veterans. Together, they recorded stories of military dogs and the soldiers they had served beside. Some shared tales of loyalty under fire. Others spoke of how their dogs had pulled them back from the brink in the years after the battlefield. Every voice mattered. Every memory found a home. The first meeting took place in the school library, which was now dedicated to Diesel and Sergeant Mason Carter. Rows of chairs filled with people, students, parents, veterans, and reporters. Even Miss Rowe, who once doubted Caleb, attended, sitting quietly in the back. Caleb stepped to the front. He wore a simple shirt, but the service pin of his father still shone at his collar. "When I first told people that Diesel was my hero," Caleb began, "they laughed. They thought I was making it up, but Diesel didn't need their approval. He knew who he was, and now so do I." He paused, glancing at a large photograph beside him. It showed Diesel in his prime, wearing his K9 vest, standing proudly next to Sergeant Mason Carter. "My dad once told me that true heroes don't ask for recognition. They just do the right thing, even when no one's looking." Diesel lived that every day. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Caleb continued, "Today we honor not just Diesel's bravery, but his purpose. He kept memories alive. He protected more than lives. He protected stories. And now we're going to continue that mission." He introduced the first speaker, a young girl named Lily, whose father had served in the Marines. She spoke of their family's dog, Bruno, a retired service canine who had saved her dad's life overseas. As she spoke, the audience leaned in, faces soft with understanding. One by one, others stood to share. A man in his 70s recounted how his military dog, Scout, had pulled him from rubble during a bombing in Vietnam. A middle-aged woman named Erica Miles, once saved by Diesel in the Middle East, told how she had lived with survivor's guilt until Diesel's recent recognition had given her peace. As each voice added to the chorus, it became clear that this wasn't just a meeting. It was a living tribute. By the end, even the reporters had set aside their notepads. They listened not as journalists, but as witnesses to a powerful, shared legacy. Caleb closed the gathering with a final reflection. This isn't the end of Diesel's story. It's just the next chapter. Each time we tell these stories, we keep the promise Diesel made, to never forget, to always protect, and to pass on the truth. As people stood to leave, many lingered by the photograph of Diesel. Some left flowers. A few placed dog tags, medals, or simple handwritten notes beside it. Outside, the old oak tree stood tall against the evening sky. Its branches stretched wide, cradling the weight of memories and the promise of new stories yet to be told. And beneath its sheltering arms, Diesel's legacy endured, not in statues or headlines, but in the hearts of all who had come to believe. As the final chapter closes, we are left with a truth deeper than words. The legacy of heroes is the memory of a great name and the inheritance of a great example. Benjamin Disraeli. Diesel's journey reminds us that loyalty never fades, even in silence. If this story moved your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice enriches the journey we take together. Subscribe to Vale Marks and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your encouragement is the heartbeat behind every video, allowing us to create more inspiring, meaningful content that honors the past and lights the way forward. Remember, some stories change us, some awaken us. This one, it might just do both.